For me, it really starts with the pipe tune, and then as the drum section the drum music gradually comes into shape, okay, what are the key phrases? What are the key runs that are gonna pop out at you if there's a cool triplet run? Well, that's going to be something that we might want to jump on with the tenors and do some kind of cool descending digga-da-digga-da-dum or digga-da-digga-da-dum or what have you. Whether it's finishing with the bass drum or incorporating the bass drum into that lick is entirely up to you in that moment, kind of thing. But there's going to be, again, certain passages like that naturally I think are just going to come out. Big thing for me is ending phrases. Like you'll notice, for example, when I'm playing some of my reels, particularly the Dowco stuff, when I was with Triumph Street, you'll notice that the tenor drummers are playing an ending phrase consistently in the end parts of the reel, and that's a part where I'll just duck out and let them play, and then I'll be back in on the last stroke of the bar or the one going into the next part, that kind of thing. So again, middle section, it's learning, it's kind of just listening again to the music and hearing these natural accents. And to me, those are probably going to be parts that you might want to zone in on and think, well, maybe we can put something here with the bass. Maybe we can put something here with the tenors. And again, keeping in mind that you don't want to step on each other's toes. When you get too much of that happening, it starts to make things muddy and cloudy. When you get into situations like that, it comes down to tuning. And if you've got different pitches that work well together, to again use like a drum kit type of scenario, when you hit a tom-tom, there's nothing stopping you from hitting the kick drum at the same time and getting those two tones happening, but they have to work well together. Realizing that often with some of the lower grade bands, they're still figuring out their tuning and so on. Some of the higher grade bands are still figuring out their tuning. It's a tough thing to get sometimes. Probably the easiest thing to do in that situation is to talk to the bass drummer, take him or her aside and say, listen, tenor drummers are doing something here. Why don't we just cool it for a second and then we'll come back in on the one or what have you. Sometimes, again, it's just easier. There's only one bass drummer. It's easier to just pull the goalie for a second, and then we're back in. That's how I typically approach that, when I'm working with some of the lower grade bands that I've worked with. I think it's a natural tendency for them to just want to be playing all the time. I'm the person locking the foundation down. So if I drop out, it's gonna be a house of cards. Not always the case, provided you've got the tenor drummers on point that they can carry that little phrase and then you're back in. So probably that would be my approach. The easiest thing would be, okay, there's 4 or 5 or there's 3 of you. There's only 1 of you. So let's just snip your part for like half a bar. Awesome. And then we're good, Balance is tough. Again, when you're wearing the bass drum, for example, you've got a very different perspective than what is going on 10, 20 feet outside the circle. You're right on top of the shell. You're not in the kind of sound cone that naturally comes out from the actual bass drum head. So oftentimes it is really hard to gauge where you're at volume-wise or what weight you should be playing. And you can't be 2 places at once. And so this is again where it's really important to have your comrades in the band. Have one of the pipers who's hip and knows what's going on, who's got a little bit of a clue on what's happening on ensemble. Have your lead drummer step out. If you've got a lead tenor drummer, have them step out. Particularly when you're playing all together as the whole band, because it's very important to know where you are at volume-wise in the context of the whole band. You don't want to be too overpowering. Like you said, it can be a very loud instrument. It can also be a very subtle instrument. I've been knocked, for both ways. I've been knocked for playing too loud, too aggressively, I've been knocked for being too quiet. Sometimes, you can't please everybody all the time, but it's finding that balance. Really, the only way you're going to get that in terms of the bass drum is to have one of your pals step out and give you a hand and tell you a little bit up, a little bit down, play out a bit more. And you can really only get that standing outside the circle, 10 feet back or so. It's also similar when it comes to the tenor drums, by the way. There's naturally, some of the drums are going to cut through more than others, particularly the smaller drums. They're smaller drums, they've got a higher pitch. They're going to get through, and you're going to be able to hear those much, much easier than the lower drums, the 18-inch tenor drums, the 20-inch tenor drums, the 22-inch tenor drums that some of these bands, the really bass drums that some of these bands are playing now as tenor drums. Those bassier notes are going to get lost more, so sometimes you might have to come on to one of those drums a little bit more to carry out. It also gets down to positioning. If you've got a bigger tenor section, some of these bands now are playing upwards of 6 players, 7, 8, 9. Some of these big bands, they've got an army of tenor drummers. And again, that's potentially taking away more work from the bass drummer. If you're a band that is the size of Field Marshal, there's a lot of volume there, and you're going to want to position yourselves accordingly so that the parts you're playing are going to be able to cut through that massive pipe tone. And again, as you say, the more tenor drummers you have, it's going to change your role perhaps as a bass drummer. So if if you're playing in band A and then you eventually move to band B and it's a different size bass and tenor section, you might have to adjust the way you approach your instrument because, well, over here I had 8 tenor drummers and here we've got 4. So again, it's that kind of different approach. I come from more of the small section, and over the years I found myself in big sections, and so I've had to adjust a lot how I've played too over time. If you look back like 20 years ago or whatever, a long time ago, to when I was playing with Halifax Police, for example, the way I played back then was way different. Still pretty badass, but way different to what I played last year with Triumph Street, for example. Number of tenor drummers was definitely a huge factor, and in Halifax we were dealing with a very small number. We were a band that was just coming out of grade 2, and brand new into grade 1. That's a huge curve as it is, but then. We also had a small section back then. This is still kind of back in an era where the tenor drummers were not quite hadn't really come into their own yet to where we're accustomed to today. So I think back then I think maybe we had 3 tenor drummers. On top of that too, let's be honest, not everyone is going to be the same skill set. You might have 3 tenor drummers, but do you really have 3 tenor drummers? Maybe you've got 1.5 or 2. I mean, that's the reality. So I found myself in that kind of situation, covering a lot of parts on the bass drum. It also, the players I was listening to at the time tended to kind of attack it a bit more, and they're perhaps a little bit more aggressive on the bass drum front as well. So that was kind of inspiring to me at the time. So I kind of, modeled my playing after that. Fast forward many years later, when I'm playing with the Frasers and I'm playing with Dowco, it's a bit of a different approach. And, you're thinking, again, by this time, ensemble wins, and you're thinking about the bigger picture, not just about super cool, awesome, drum licks. It's great if you can play roughs and dead strokes and all that cool stuff that I do like to throw in here and there. But I often kind of liken it to, seasoning a meal. You don't want to drown it in brown sauce. You don't want to drown it in hot sauce. You don't want to put so much salt and pepper on there that that's all you can taste. It's all about enhancing the natural flavor of whatever it is you're eating. It's support.